Welcome to our next instalment of our IP Inclusive podcast. My name is Jodie Bates and I work for Boult Wade Tennant and I'm part of the IP Inclusive Advisory Board. I'm joined here today by Max Waters.
Hi Jodie, good to see you.
You too. And we have some guests with us today. We have Fran Salisbury, who is the women's champion at Mewburn Ellis, and also part of Women in IP for the American IP Law Association, IPLA. And we're joined with Vandita Chandrani, who works for Electa Limited, and she is part of the ED&I focus group there. So today's session is about women in IP, breaking glass ceilings and staying there. Fran, if we can come to you first.
Hi.
Hello.
Thank you very much for inviting me to talk today. Lots to say about women in IP and how women can thrive in IP careers. There are still some challenges. We certainly still see, I think, quite a lot of gender imbalance at the moment, particularly in the higher kind of the more senior roles in the business, and I'd like to see that change in the next few years. There's lots of things that we can think about to make sure that happens.
How did you get into your women champions role at Muse, Burn and Ellis?
Well, I mean, I could give you a long story about that, but essentially, I decided that we needed a role and appointed myself to it. So, so I not only appointed myself, but also appointed the role, and that kind of came out of a series of conversations, really. Mewburn, I think is a great place for women to work. We were already making great progress towards kind of parity in the attorneys, equal numbers of attorneys. We're actually a very female-dominated business. I think overall, something like 62% of the employees of the business are women because of a lot of the paralegals and the administrator roles are filled by women. And so we were doing great things, but I also thought that there were probably some more things that we could do. And just because we sort of weren't, aggressively against women, perhaps, I think there was also there could have been a sense that gender was done, right? We have equal numbers of women, or we're getting towards equal numbers of women in the partnership, so we've cracked that, right? We don't need to do anything else. And I kind of disagree with that. And there are two things there. One of them being, I still think there's stuff that we can do to make sure that we get to that equal position quicker. But also, if we've got a business that's 62% women, then we need to be making sure that we are doing the things that support those women, and not necessarily running a business that was designed, originally founded, 150 something years ago, in a time where the profession was very male dominated. And I think we could do some things to make sure that we were evolving with the times and that the business works well for women, not just accommodates women, but actually allows women to thrive. And so that's why I decided we needed a women's champion and that I was going to stand up and do some things.
Hi Fran. I'll come back if I may on some of the things that is being done in the firm to sort of help women thrive and support women. But I wanted to just touch on something you mentioned briefly about from what you said, it sounds like Mewburn Ellis is actually doing very well in terms of representation in the partnership. But one of the things that we managing IP that we find when we report on gender gaps and women representation in the profession is that at entry level, it's relatively well split, and in fact, sometimes even potentially a little bit more females entering the profession than males. But then when it gets to partner level, that's where it really kind of falls off a bit of a cliff edge. So yeah, I'm wondering how we can. It's probably quite not an easy answer, but how can we change attitudes and approaches so that that's not a sort of accepted statistic? Because often when we speak to, managing partners or when we speak to law firms, they'll say, oh, yes, well, we face troubles. Women like to go and have a family, or they take time off. But to me, that shouldn't be a valid reason. Yeah,
Yeah,
what's your take on that? Yeah.
it's hugely complex, right? And
Mm,
there's a whole bunch of stuff that we as a firm are not going to solve.
mm,
So I regularly come up against that statistic, that kind of maybe not statistic, but that kind of idea that, well, women have children and lots of women like to take time off. And I 100% think that if women want to take time off, then they should, that should be an option open to them. But it's not just women that have kids. As far as I'm
mm.
aware, men tend to be quite commonly involved in that process.
I can tell you that
And
men do have children from personal experience. Yeah.
um and yet it doesn't impact men's careers in the same
Mm,
way. And so one of the things that, that statistic always identifies to me is that there is this kind of massive societal bias against men taking time off.
mm,
And we've done some stuff around kind of maternity and paternity, well, parental leave policies to try and kind of equalize that out a little bit, because we will never get to equality but that statistic will always, or that kind of excuse perhaps will always be there until it's more normal for men to take time off. My understanding is that in Scandinavian countries, it's quite common for men to take a year of paternity to look
mm,
after the child while mum goes back to work. And it what that means is that in the kind of more senior ranks of Scandinavian businesses, you have a more equal balance because the contribution of women in those situations is kind of appreciated, and they don't experience that. Well, yes, but of course the women will want to take time off. Well, yes, but maybe the men want to take time off too. How do we facilitate that to make sure that it's normal for the men to be taking some time off if they want to. It's normal for the women to be coming back if they want to, or having the choice to take time off. So there are those kind of, things about British society, about other kind of national societies where we're not going to change those things overnight, but we
mm,
can help create an environment where it is more balanced and where it allows that to happen. There's a bunch of those kind of things where um, I mean, I can sort of think of 10 excuses why aren't there more women in your senior partnership? Well, one of them is historic. It does
mm,
take time to change these positions. Um, we have quite a lot, only 38%, I think, of our senior leaders are women. So it's coming
mm,
up, but it's taking time to normalize out. And some of that is just a factor that a lot of those men were there in a time when there was more bias and when there were fewer women. It is more
mm,
normal. It is a factor of that we have those men in those senior roles. So it'll take some time to iron that out. But that's not to say that that's how it should always be. And we have to make sure that we are doing things that allow us to change that over time, to kind of keep an eye on that really, to make sure it is continuing to change. I've had kind of conversations with people when I've seen senior women leave the business, and senior women, senior men leave the business for
mm,
all sorts of reasons. Um, and none of them turn around and go, well, it's because of the systemic gender bias I do or don't face. But
mm,
what they do kind of talk about often, there's always, in individual cases, you look at it and you think, well, maybe that person did want a change of career. Maybe that person did want to spend time with their family. Maybe that person did, their circumstances meant that they left. And it's very easy to kind of rationalize those out. And when you step back and go, well, hang on,
mm,
it's still the case that two-thirds of the people that left at that time were women. So what's going on there? Some of that will be societal, but some of it we can make steps to address and make sure that we are putting in um, systems, frameworks, that we are providing an environment where those women actually do have a a true free choice about that. And I'm not meaning that they're coerced in some way, but I'm meaning that
mm,
in the societal kind of milieu in which we all exist, that they actually maybe can't, it's not as free a choice as you might think it is. And so
mm,
we need to make sure that we are truly thinking about those things and making sure that
mm.
that choice is an open one.
Why do you think, and Vandita, Jodie, feel free to come on this if you want to. Why do you think the UK is behind those other, places like Scandinavia you mentioned, where they have a much sort of more relaxed attitude to men taking extended leave and those allowing them to have a longer paternity leave and then giving women a chance to go back sooner. Why is the UK a bit outdated in its attitude in that respect, do you think?
Might be a good time for me to jump in actually,
Go for it.
because my company has got Swedish headquarters.
Okay,
So,
perfect. Yeah.
so yeah, I can't answer the question that you asked because I actually don't know the answer, but I can speak about the fact that we frequently have colleagues who are based in our Stockholm office, men who take extended paternity leave, which is not extended as far as they're concerned. It's just a regular paternity leave. But on this side, in the UK office, it receives a mixed reception. It receives the reception, as you said, Fran, of, oh, that was a surprise. And also a not again, if, for example, it's a second child. It is definitely so ingrained within UK society that if you are hiring a woman who is, of a particular age, that there is a high likelihood that she is, potentially at some point going to take maternity leave. Whereas the prospect that a man might do the same is completely shocking to people. And, as I said, it doesn't answer your question about why, but I feel it's very, very ingrained. And, in a future podcast, we might be talking about unconscious bias, and that's probably, a prime example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say we're going to come on to that I think in a future episode, but you can imagine a situation where a hiring manager, in the back of their mind, if they're speaking to a woman, as you say, of a certain age, they might be thinking, oh, is this person going to have a year off at some point? And it absolutely shouldn't do, but does that affect their decision on whether to hire and whether to bring that person on board? And
as I say, I think it runs all the way through as well, and that it's not necessarily something IP businesses have to solve, but it's sort of a societal thing where, I have a lot of female colleagues who receive the phone call when the child is sick. Even if they're not number one on the list of people to call, even though they might have told nursery that they're unavailable today, or dad works from home perhaps and he's able to answer those calls and come and collect, still the nursery phone mum because that's the default for them. Similarly, I have friends and colleagues who they're men, they are the primary carer for the child, but they have perhaps felt a little excluded. And I don't know, again, it's always very difficult to put kind of facts behind this. Like, I don't know the statistics for it, but I know the anecdotes of them kind of being at the school gate almost and feeling excluded from the conversation because they're not one of the mums. Well, they sort of are in the sense that they're the primary carer doing that role. And so I think something that as society and as women, we need to notice that we're doing that too, and bringing the men into that and normalizing that part of things. Because only, as I say, when we have this kind of it's entirely normal for dad to take some time off. It's entirely normal for mum to be back at work. Only then will we have this kind of more equal society. I mean, something that we need to kind of bring into this, I think, is probably that in Scandinavia there's a lot wider access to free and subsidized childcare. That's something that we as a society need to, in the UK, need to address, because if you can't afford to go back to work, or if it's going to really sting to have the kind of wraparound childcare that accommodates you going to the EPO for a hearing, or you doing an early morning, late night call with a client, well, that's going to hamper your profession, isn't it? Because you're just not going to be free to do that.
I completely agree. So, with the society standpoint of it, obviously not everyone's partner, co-parent works in the IP profession. My husband runs his own roofing business. If he doesn't go to work, he doesn't earn. So a lot of the ownership does fall on me. The school know that if my 5-year-old is unwell on Monday or a Tuesday, they call dad because I'm in London. They're the days I do. But I'm the one that has to rally around, take days off during the school holidays to sort out childcare. I'm the one that has to find workshops, run her to them, jig my hours around, but I have that flexibility. So yeah, I think it is a massive society. And I think a lot of it, and we've touched on it in previous podcasts, is men sometimes have this perception that they need to be the breadwinner, they need to go to work, and that is slowly changing, not quite quick enough. But yeah, I think a society standpoint on it it is slowly shifting,
Mm.
but
It's
more can be
it's
done.
it's worth chipping in on there as well that it's not just about childcare. There's a whole bunch of mental load stuff that isn't around childcare. Women are more likely to care for older relatives
Mm.
than men are. I mean, why? The men I know are perfectly capable of looking after an
Mm.
older relative, but for some reason that doesn't happen. So that's something that we need to think about how we can normalize that. And similarly, it, I noticed, I mean, Jodie, you mentioned, I'm the one that organizes the childcare, I'm the one that
Mm.
organizes the summer camps and stuff. I mean, I'm not saying it's not strictly true in your case, but I think often it's the default that I'm going to organize the roof, or I'm going to organise the childcare, or I'm going to
Mm.
organise getting this fixed or that fixed or whatever. I'd like to see in certainly not all men, it's not all women,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure that everyone is kind of aiming towards the more like we're not stepping up to making sure that we're all doing our equal share on those things. And it's not necessarily, I'm not saying it comes from a place of rudeness or I'm not doing it or I'm not my job. It's just perhaps doesn't flash through people's brains that, oh, hang on, I could step up and take that role, or I don't need to do that bit. I'm going to delegate it. So I think it's sort of on all of us to make sure that we're handing over jobs and taking on jobs to make our lives run.
Yeah, I'm a
Absolutely.
complete control freak when it comes to my daughter. So unless I ask my husband, you are taking this day off work to look after her, it doesn't happen. I have the burden. I just assume that it's all on me. But I remember when I came, I only took 5 months maternity leave with Little, and that was my choice. And I remember going back on one of my kit days, and some of the partners were like, "How's it going? Like, how's like motherhood and all this?" And I was like, oh my gosh, I used to think stay-at-home parents were lazy. I was so wrong. I could not wait to get back to work just to have that bit of time by myself on the
Mm.
train. It is hard, and it's like you were saying, Fran, at the beginning, that parents may feel like they want to take time off of their kid. No, not always. It's not an easy job.
No.
I think it's all really interesting, and obviously I mentioned the idea about women being the ones who are expected to take time off at some point and to have children, but obviously there's plenty of women who don't necessarily want to have a family or who won't have a family, and it's still going to be potentially an issue. So thinking about the IP sector and specifically, I suppose, what challenges are there that are kind of unique to IP, I suppose? And I might be thinking along the wrong lines, but I'm thinking particularly with the patent profession, the sort of requirement for STEM qualifications. What other challenges are there? I don't know if Vandita or Francis, you wanted to sort of speak about that one initially, and then we can sort of take it on from there.
Yeah, I can talk a little
Mm.
bit about that. I mean, interestingly, coming in, so more women than men get degrees now in
Mm.
the world. I think that's a statistic across the board.
Mm.
And the number of women or the proportion of women obviously varies significantly depending on which subject you're talking about. So I'm a life scientist. I have a
Mm.
biology degree. Biology degrees tend to be sort of 60% women actually coming out of BSc, and then the number drops off. The number of women biologists or the proportion of women biologists drops off over time. Engineering, for example, physics still lagging in the proportion of women. And that is reflected in the patent profession too. So you get more women in as life sciences attorneys, you get slightly fewer or a smaller proportion of physics attorneys. So there are some things that still need to be done kind of on that entry to make sure we've got kind of parity coming into it. and things, there are organizations that are dealing like that, things like Wives and Women in STEM and Women in Coding, all those different things. And again, as a profession, I'm not sure necessarily we're going to solve that problem, but there are definitely things that as a firm that we can do, or as a profession that we can do, and that we're already doing. So things like the Careers and Ideas program are a great idea just for raising this idea that women can be part of these conversations and that they are. I mean, most people, I think, probably at that stage don't even know that our professions exist, and so just highlighting that plays a great role in opening that door, or at least alerting people that there is a door that could be opened, which is the starting point. There are some things that can be done. Sorry, there are some sort of things about the profession, I think, that probably we can look at. I mean, something that always strikes me when we're talking about these professions is that, as a patent attorney, kind of when I'm talking about talking to clients for IP strategy, I'm often doing it on my own, and I'm standing on my own 2 feet, and I'm doing it in isolation. And I sometimes have to check myself, and I think I've learnt, the more senior I've got, the older and wiser I've perhaps gotten, the less I realize that's true. My instinct to do it by myself and to do it all myself. Well, actually, I like bringing in teams. I like collaborating. I like helping other people to bring them in on the conversation. And so I think that kind of opening that door to a different way of working than perhaps you might expect. I think that's something that we can think of. That I think makes it a more accessible profession for women. I mean, it's always really difficult, isn't it? Because we talk about women as if we're some sort of amorphous body which have the same traits and characteristics and desires, etc. And that's just 100% not true, because we're a spectrum, just as the men in our profession are a spectrum, and all the genders in our profession are a spectrum. And actually, what I come down to on a lot of this is that I'm not kind of on the extreme of, well, we should just make sure that there are 50% women across the board. If you're a woman, you should be promoted. That's 100% not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that we need to look at the system to make sure it's a fair playing field so that people can thrive, irrespective of gender, that they've not received, there's not kind of systemic problems in the way we do the work or the way the profession runs. And some of that will therefore help some men as well. And so it's, to my mind, some of the things that we as a profession can do is think about physically how we're doing the work. Are we doing it in isolation? Are we collaborating more, bringing in teams, thinking about how meetings are scheduled, how we work with clients, making sure that that we are doing that in a way that is inclusive to help both the women in the profession, but to help other people whom perhaps the older way of doing things maybe doesn't work so well. So not necessarily a specific thing about the job, but maybe there's a tendency there.
Yeah, I actually think the patent profession is an excellent place for women to thrive. It's not as intense as, say, being a junior lawyer would be in terms of the kinds of hours that people keep. The vast majority of patent attorneys that I know are able to keep sensible hours, are able to build some flexibility in if they need it, aside from perhaps on days when you do have, an EPO hearing or something. So in that respect, I think it is a place that flexibility can be built in, and everyone, regardless, male, female, anybody who would like some of that flexibility has the opportunity to thrive. I've been in private practice. I now sit on the other side. And I think that in-house attorneys, in-house departments have a huge part to play in this as well. In-house, the legal department at Electa is, there's a greater number of women than there are of men in the department, although we still have the problem that senior leadership is male by and large. But, we're working on that. But what I do is I ask the, private practices that we work with to give us information, to give us data. I always want to see a diverse team when I'm working with people, and we ask for that up front. I'm also incredibly respectful of people's working hours, and I myself work part-time. And if I invite people to tell me what their working hours are, where they need flexibility. We have a firm that we work with, and one of the partners is based in France. And in France, there is no childcare on Wednesdays. So she has every Wednesday off. I say off in inverted commas because I am a single parent to a 6-year-old, and I appreciate that any time not working is more on than off. But I make sure that I do not invite her to meetings on Wednesdays. If I accidentally do, and if she then says, yep, I'll be there, I just need to, just be aware that there are kids in the background, I will promptly change the time of that meeting or the day of that meeting. And so for me, a lot of this comes down to transparency and respect. People should feel able to set their boundaries, set their limitations vocally. I want to encourage, if anybody's listening to this and they are a senior partner in a patent firm, I will speak directly to them and say, I, as the client, want to know if somebody cannot do particular timings. I will never, unless it's something extremely urgent, I never need that answer the minute I send the email. I never need people to jump on the call immediately unless I have expressly asked for it. And so I just want to kind of break this myth that people in private practice have to be at the beck and call of their clients, because the clients aren't the ones asking for it.
That's really interesting. Yeah, because that's often what we hear, and especially from, I think you alluded to earlier there, where you get junior lawyers who are working all hours in some professions, perhaps not in patent attorney profession, perhaps not even in IP, but certainly in the sort of corporate side of things. And the idea is always that they're at the beck and call of clients, so they're answering these clients. But that's interesting that change can come from in-house as well, because if the client isn't demanding something, or if the client is demanding something, i.e. a diverse team working on a matter, then they can really help to shape change in that way as well.
Yeah, I think you really elegantly put the kind of point that I was stumbling to make about it's that awareness piece that what's myth and what's true. Just because we've always done it that way, just because we've always had private practice attorneys jumping on the phone the minute the client puts their hand up, that doesn't mean to say that it's the right way of doing it, or that it's a necessary way of doing it. There's flexibility there, and it comes from setting boundaries, but also making sure that people are aware that they can set their own boundaries. Like, we're not saying, well, you can get back to the client in 6 weeks or just completely ignore the client, but it's about the client being aware of what those boundaries are and understanding when they're going to get a response. I liked your point about seeing diverse teams, because I think that's something that we as a profession can do as well, because whilst we obviously have clients, we are also the clients of other people. And so when you are looking for counsel in another country, or whether you're looking for service providers, that's something where you can exercise some control as well. I mean, I know that we're certainly seeing from clients an increased interest in making sure that we are presenting diverse teams, and that diversity actually runs through. I've got examples of clients sort of saying, not only do we want to see that you are presenting a diverse team on the pitch, but that actually, when it comes to the matters that you're dealing with, that those women and minorities are still there. They haven't just suddenly disappeared. And similarly, you can do the same when it's like, right, okay, who's my foreign counsel for that? Who am I using? Have I automatically gone to the man that I know looks like a patent attorney, or am I choosing someone who actually is going to be the best person for that job? It's just about asking yourself those questions, I think, and making sure that we're asking them all the way through the process.
Yeah, this is a really interesting point, actually, because I would say that we've had people where they have unwittingly lost business to us because they have thought that they needed to turn up with their senior people who disproportionately may be men and in many cases, white men. Whereas the actual team that might be doing the work is possibly fully diverse because that's the more junior set of people. But because they've turned up to us, with this panel of men, for me at least, it would certainly turn me off, and I would say, no thanks. Whereas actually, if they had turned up with maybe the partner or the two partners that are actually genuinely involved in the work and the actual team of people that are doing the work, I would have been far more receptive to giving them it.
I liked what you said earlier, Vandita, about how you're in the senior levels of your organization. There is still it's fairly male dominated, and you said that you're working on that, which I like. It sounds like there's some sort of potential coup going on there, but I'm only joking. But it's I suppose it leads me to the question.
It's a constant personal mission.
Yeah, exactly. It does lead me to the question, at the risk of turning the heat on me, as the only male on this podcast. But what can male colleagues do, I suppose, to champion and promote women, and that's right from a junior level, but also through to senior levels.
I love this question.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, and
there's
also
probably
have
many things that could be done, but yeah.
Yeah, if I start with just a couple of really basic things, and then Fran, you can give the more kind of technical, probably appropriate answers. But this all goes back to awareness and transparency for me. And, if it's uncomfortable, I always think, people find it uncomfortable to talk about some of these things and don't feel as if they want to be, outwardly championing women. And, that can be uncomfortable for people. But everybody at some point in their life, every man, every woman will leave the office for some reason or other, right? So you will get as many men leaving the office because they want to go and see their kids' show, or because they need to take an animal to the vet, or they're, dropping their mum off at a hospital appointment or something. Be vocal about it. Just say, this is what I'm doing. That then gives permission for everybody else in the organization, man or woman, to feel as if they also can do the same. And that then will hopefully unlock bit by bit the ability for men to feel comfortable to take paternity leave and to, ask for flexible arrangements. And in turn, that then helps the women who are already trying to do this, but, feeling as if they're perhaps compromised by doing so.
Interesting.
Yeah, that speaking out and normalizing it is so powerful, and particularly from the senior leaders in the organization, creating that culture that it's entirely normal for the as you say, predominantly male, often white senior partners. Yes, I'm going to be out for an hour or two here because I've got to do this caring responsibility. It's so powerful. The other thing I think that which kind of relates into all of this, is that asking questions about things and not just taking things at face value. We see a lot of, one of the traits that is often talked about, and it doesn't just happen to women, but this speaking over people in meetings or not letting people finish, which I'm a little bit prone to it myself, so apologies. If you see someone speaking over someone in a meeting, if you see someone belittling someone's contribution to a meeting, it's about kind of just stopping it, and you don't have to be aggressive towards the person who's doing it, but it's simply like, Vandita, you were speaking there, something you were saying, what was that? Going back to it. And just not necessarily assuming that the behavior or thing that you're observing means what you think it does. So yes, the person might be being quiet. Are they being quiet because they don't know the answer, or are they being quiet because they don't feel safe speaking up? Provide that space for them to speak up, give them the opportunity. Don't just assume that they're being quiet because they haven't got anything to say on the matter. The other thing, I was going to draw attention to, we had a beautiful example recently where we were looking at some promotions across a group of candidates, attorneys who'd all ranked themselves against we have a kind of framework which we've put in so that there are objective criteria in which to rank themselves. And so we had a gender balanced split of applications, and it was immediately apparent to me that when you look down these candidates who were all at an equal stage, but the The men had ranked themselves excellent against all grounds.
Mm.
And the women had said, yeah, I can do that. I'm competent. And I was like, but is that true? Like, is it actually true that these people are excellent at these things and these people are merely competent? Or is it that these people have played it safe? Yep, definitely got that. There's more that I can do. And these people are overselling themselves. And simply by drawing attention to the fact that, yes, we had an objective scale, yes, people had ranked themselves against these objective criteria and come out with a number, and we'd got an answer. Did that answer actually require a little bit of further interrogation and a little bit of, are you really competent or are you actually excellent? Like, should we be raising you up on that? So just kind of by observing and questioning whether the information that I'd been presented with was objectively true, despite all the other stuff that we put in, we actually then kind of like, oh yeah, there's an inadvertent bias occurring here. I mean, spoiler, they all four got promoted, but it was a really interesting observation in behavioral characteristics. And I mean, as I say, it may not, I mean, in this case, it was split by gender. It may not have been split by gender. It could have just been that those people felt that way. And so by questioning that information, we got to a better, I'm confident we got to a better and more balanced result.
Interesting. Yeah. And that's really interesting as well. What you were saying, Vandita, about normalizing mentioning when you're leaving the office for whatever reason. I don't know, Jodie, is that something that you sort of feel comfortable doing in your organization? Is it something that others do? Well, from what you've seen, do people tend to be honest about where they're going and what they're doing, or is there still a kind of, I don't know, not secretiveness about it, I suppose, but just a reluctance to sort of share why people may be taking time out?
No, not really. I work in IT and there's 9 of us, and it's only me and one other young lady who does 1 day a week on work experience, and we're literally the only 2 females in the department. I've worked in IT for nearly 20 years now, and it's a very, very male-dominated sector, and it always has been. I'm quite open. I don't have much of a filter, so I do kind of say stuff. So I personally feel comfortable, and I never feel to the point where I've said something and think, should I have said that I'm working from home? Like at the beginning of school holidays, Little come down with a sickness bug, and I was working from home, and I had to say to my boss, look, I'm working from home today, luckily, and I work part-time, and I only do shorter hours on the days that I work from home. And I said, I'm going to have Little with me. And he was like, that's fine. Like, family comes first. And he was absolutely fine with that. And sometimes if I need to, I don't have to care for older relatives, but if I need to do anything with the pets, I don't feel reluctant and uncomfortable to say that. And I've never been felt made uncomfortable being female in an IT role. In my previous work, which was a manufacturing corporate company, a couple of times I've done induction training for IT, and men have walked into the room and gone, oh, so you're the trainer? And I'm like, yeah. They're like, oh, I thought it'd be a man. And I was like, no, you've got me. And it baffled me, because I sat there and thought, where did that assumption come from? But I've worked with colleges that do STEM projects with engineering, and once again, the male participants in the courses massively outweigh the females. So I think it goes back even further. We need to make females, young ladies, to feel more comfortable with enrolling. And we all know the banter that goes on at college and university and stuff like that. And it's probably a lot of stuff that's said out of turn there that may give females that impression of, I can't do that, I can't say that. I personally don't feel that, and I haven't really ever felt that in my work, but I've learned to be assertive, maybe sometimes too assertive, but it's something I learned from quite a young age in my job, because I started IT training in my early 20s and now I'm in my early 30s. I don't feel like I need to be as assertive as I was.
Interesting.
Yeah.
This might be one for the future episode on unconscious bias, but it's interesting as well, because it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like there's a difference in how people perceive assertiveness from men and how they perceive it from women as well. And sometimes with women, they're bossy, or they're gobby or whatever, or they're like opinionated or whatever. But with men, it's just assertive, which is sometimes seen as a positive, when in reality it's the same thing. It's just coming from different people.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting one actually in terms of the kind of overarching theme of this, of how do women thrive? Something
Mm,
that we also need to be aware of is the types of tasks that get handed out to women. So
mm,
outside of the kind of IP stuff that we were all originally employed for, that kind of raises its head in that it's quite common for women to find themselves tasked with, oh, could you take the minutes for the meeting?
mm,
Well,
mm,
why me? Like, why do I have some innate skill in minute writing that my
mm,
male colleague doesn't? And similarly, I've certainly found a few times where I've had to sidestep. Well, could you organise the Christmas party? Could you just book the restaurant for
mm,
this? I don't have any special skills or expertise in that area. And I'm not saying that these people kind of chose me because I was a woman, but there was a sort of an innate understanding that I might do that sort of thing. The
mm,
same is true with HR issues. I mean, I quite like working with people and helping people and training people and that kind of pastoral side of the role, but I don't necessarily think that's just because I'm a woman. And so making sure that those, we're not just assuming that because I happen to have a womb that I must be
mm,
good at looking after people. Um, Again, it's about asking those questions and just making sure that would I have asked my female or male colleague that exact same question?
mm,
I think, Fran, that's it's really interesting. This reminds me of something Jodie said earlier on as well about the fact that women have a responsibility in that as well. Because while perhaps for you, you would not consider it to be a skill set that you would associate with you, and therefore why are you being asked just because you're a woman? I witness it the other way around, where I see lots of women adopting that role and doing it because they think they can do it better than other people can. And so,
mm,
because I think Jodie, you mentioned that earlier on as well about picking up the mental load with childcare and being a control person. I can't say freak, but I think it happens both ways. And so I think there's a collective responsibility for the people asking and the people doing to, you know, set boundaries again.
excellent. I think obviously this is a topic we could talk about for much longer, but I think we should probably should wrap up and think of any sort of final, is there any sort of final thoughts anyone had or sort of reasons to be positive for the future that we could maybe end on? It's always nice to sort of end on a positive note, I think. But yeah, I mean, Fran, did you have any sort of final thoughts or yeah,
I don't know, how do we summarize the whole thing
yeah,
in a kind of
well,
soundbite? It's a
yeah,
it's a tricky one.
of course.
Um, Sometimes when I think quite hard about it, like we sort of started off talking about all the challenges, and
Mm,
here we are, and we're a long way from parity still, and there's stuff that we're not going to fix because it's
mm,
it's not necessarily on firms, it's on society. But I do think that things are changing. And I'm looking forward to, I'm already seeing that there is a slightly different way of working that with the changes in flexibility and working from home that we saw introduced by COVID. I think we're looking at the first stage of a new way of doing things where characteristics, behaviors, traits, ways of working that are perhaps more typically associated with women. So maybe a softer way of doing things, maybe a more collaborative way of doing things, a more flexible way that allows other parts of our lives to be brought in. I see that we're moving in that general direction. It's a slow journey, but I'm
mm,
I'm I'm comfortable that we're on it. And I'm excited about the number of women who are now able or feel able to stand up in organizations like this
mm,
and ask for a new way for things to be. Not in a kind of God damn it, we're women, we should be promoted. I mean, we
mhm,
should be.
mm,
But not just because we're women, but because we have unique skills and excellent ability that we're offering. Um, we need a system that works for all women to thrive, and that's what we're working towards, and that will help men too,
mm.
because we're not all the same, and it's about providing a system that allows people to thrive despite those differences.
Excellent. And Vandita, anything from you to conclude or?
Yeah, I guess just to complement that,
Mm,
I've started seeing increasing numbers of male partners take paternity leave, and I applaud and welcome that. And the more of that happens, I think the easier everything else becomes.
Excellent. I think it's also, when you said, Fran, about parity, it reminds me of a quote, which might be a nice quote to end on, of Brenda Hale. I'm sure you might have heard it. Who's the former head of the Supreme Court, UK Supreme Court. She was apparently asked in an interview, when will there be enough women on the Supreme Court bench? Apparently she said, when it's all of them. So that's quite a nice way to think about it, I think. But yeah, I guess that leads me to say thank you both, Vandita and Fran, for joining us for this conversation, and thanks to you, Jodie, for being my co-host. It's been another really interesting chat. So thank you to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.